Well, hey there, Aletheia Church. Good to have you guys back in Gospel Community. Hope that you guys had a wonderful Christmas and New Year's. I just want to spend a few minutes recapping my sermon from this past Sunday, where we started our second part of our Instructions to a Young Church series in Second Timothy. And I started off by talking about just how important it was to understand the difference between the first letter and this letter, and how the historical context of this second letter is centered around the idea that Paul is now in prison. And what he's doing is he's looking back on his life, he's reflecting on God's faithfulness to him in ministry, and he takes a moment to remember that he needs to reach out to his brother, his friend, and as he even says in his first letter to Timothy, his spiritual child, and just encourage him to continue to live out the implications of what it means to be a faithful pastor and minister there in Ephesus. And so we talked about this past Sunday how Paul is trying to encourage Timothy on the importance of leaving a legacy the type of which he had left in Timothy's life and in Ephesus. And we said that there was kind of two main points that he was trying to get across to Timothy in ways that he could encourage this legacy to be built in his life and in his ministry. And that first point was that he encouraged Timothy to practice gratitude or gratefulness. And one of the ways he shows that to Timothy is just reminding Timothy of all the ways that he is encouraged and thankful for what God has done. He shares about how he's just thankful for Timothy's life. He shares about how he's thankful for Timothy's friendship and fellowship. He shares how he's thankful for Timothy's faith and the ways in which he's seen Timothy grow in his faith. And then he shares how he's thankful for Timothy's family and Timothy's family legacy. And so we see this kind of consistent theme that if we want to leave a legacy to others that shows our love for God and what he's done in our life, we do that by consistently reminding ourselves of why we're doing that in the first place and what we have to be thankful for. We then moved on to say that the second thing Timothy's encouraged to do by Paul is to remember God's faithfulness. So the first thing he encourages Timothy to do in leaving a legacy is to practice gratitude or thankfulness towards God. The second thing he encourages him to do is to remember God's faithfulness. And he does that in two ways. He tells him first to just remember what God's already done in your life. He says, fan the flame of what God's done in your life. He's calling Timothy to remember how God has saved him and how God has equipped him uniquely for ministry. And then as he recalls that and remembers that and thinks on that, to both be grateful for it, but then to also press into that and use that to motivate himself to continue to make much of Jesus in his ministry. The second thing he encourages Timothy to do is just remember this, that God is the source of power in our ministry and on our legacy. He says, Timothy, it is not you, it is not your ministry, but it is Jesus. Through the power of the Holy Spirit, you will persevere, Timothy. God is your power source. And he's sharing that same thing with us. Church, if we want to be the people of God who love God well and leave a legacy for our children, our grandchildren, and hopefully by God's grace, even our great-grandchildren, may we practice together, encouraging one another to remind ourselves of what we have to be thankful for and how we can be reminded of God's faithfulness to us. I love you guys so much. I'm excited that we're able to still continue to gather. I'm praying for you regularly. I love you guys. Have a great evening in Gospel Community. Have a good week. Go and be the church.